Hello everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at this anthology called Japan, as viewed by 17 creators, put out by Fanfare Pokemon. Really love the people at Fanfare, have met them at both Comic-Con and Mocha. At Mocha, I bought everything they had that had anything to do with Jiro Taniguchi because they're the ones that handle his stuff and they do an absolutely superb job on all of their books. So this has some Jiro Taniguchi in it, but it's also got a ton of other really great creators that I love. And so I was very excited to finally read this. What it is it's a number of Japanese artists doing comics about Japan from their view as people who live there. And then there's a number of European artists, people who are famous in the European comic scene, going over and doing comics about Japan more from the tourist view. And you really get a fleshed out view of a place that way. You get the insider and the outsider view, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone else do something like that. You usually get one view or the other in a project. So this is really cool. I just wanted to go through and show one spread from each story, show the artists, and encourage you to buy it because I think it's a beautiful book. The first story here is by Kan Takahama, not an artist I'm familiar with, but it's really interesting for a Japanese artist to be working in this more like digital pencil type of look. Threw me off, but I like that. I like seeing the variety. This one is about some people who are going out to the very western tip of Japan, and that's pretty cool that there's just like this little finger that sticks out to be able to visit, and they're talking about that. So an interesting one of the local perspectives. This story is by the European artist David Prudhomme. This one is about just the bathing culture as seen from the outside, and some people going into some of the baths and just talking about that kind of part of the Japanese culture. Then you get the Jiro Taniguchi story, which is, I'm assuming how Pokemon got this is that it's dealing with Jiro Taniguchi's stuff. And they're printing all his work. As is typical with Jiro Taniguchi, you get this beautiful, dense artwork, super highly detailed, amazing renderings of cities and nature, but also probably more than any other artist, just a master of using tones to get a sense of light and atmosphere. And you can see this sparkle effect that he's got here of the shimmering out on the water with the sparkles getting smaller as they go back. Absolute master, and just it's anything by him I'm always excited to get. So very happy to have a Jiro Taniguchi in here. This story is by a French artist named Aurelia Aurita, but Aurelia I didn't quite understand if she's half Chinese, half Cambodian, or if her parents are half Chinese, half French, and half Cambodian, half French. I'm not sure, but she's French. And in this story, again, she's going into one of the public baths and is very surprised that people are assuming she's Japanese. So that's funny. And then there's just also some really great cartooning, like this whole scene where she slips and the little like X to make the butthole. I thought was really funny. But this really beautiful, like, oh my God, I'm gonna maybe faint, I'm cold, and the shapes in here and stuff. I really enjoyed the cartooning in this one. Apparently this artist is working on some larger like autobiographical projects, which given the cartooning here, I'm gonna have to look up and check out. Another super cool entry in this is this piece by Squayton and Peters of the Invisible Cities, or the Obscure Cities, however you know that series. They do a really interesting format here where there's some narrative here and then illustrations to go along with it. This is entirely made up. They're making up a story about Japan, and I especially liked, I forget the commenter's name that doesn't like how I say especially, but especially like this page here where they've gone out of their way to do something that's out of their normal style, veering towards like a manga layout, and they even have it reading from right to left. So that's really cool that they included that in there. And then you get pages that look like the typical art you would get in the Obscure Cities book. So that was a real treat in this entry. The next story is by Emmanuel Gilbert, and kind of does the same thing where it's pretty much a prose story with illustrations accompanying it. And these are some really beautiful illustrations. This almost looks like a painting, but if you look at the other ones, they're pretty much a two-tone print on white paper, it looks like, with just a lot of cool printing techniques. So some really interesting illustration here. An artist I'm going to have to look up just because of the kind of calligraphic simplicity of these is really, really beautiful. Really enjoyed that piece as well, and exposed me to artists I hadn't heard of before. Maybe someone who's not working in comics so much because of this approach, but I don't know. The Squayton and Peters took that approach as well. The next story is by Nicholas de Cressy, another one of the European artists. Very, very loose, sketchy style. Again, kind of like a travel journal thing. Right out the gate, notice that this reminds me of Daisuke Igarashi's work, the way that it looks like not working from a photograph, but someone who's live and in person sketching. All the art throughout this story has that vibe, and I really love it. It's a real sense of place and speed and stuff, but also really reminded me of some of the images we were getting out of early versions of Midjourney. And that actually inspired me a lot, because you'd see something like this where the perspective is pretty good, but things are warped, or there's not faces on the people, not everything's perfect, but you could still read it perfectly well. And I think Nicholas de Cressy is doing a really good job at that exact same thing, where he's getting down to just like the essentials of the image, and it has that freshness of someone who's doing straight to ink sketching. So really like that. Another artist, name I'm familiar with, but I'm gonna have to look up what this artist has done. Actually, this one in particular is also interesting because it takes this approach that reminds me of Goodnight Pun Pun as well, where Nicholas de Cressy is in this story basically, I don't know if he's representing himself or just an artist, but an artist who's been sent to Japan to solve some advertising problem, and he's looking at all of the characters that they make over there, and then trying to basically come up with the character, and he's representing himself as the character he's trying to come up with. So remind me also of what Inio Sanyo does in Goodnight Pun Pun, with this more cartoony character amidst the more real based characters. And it's an interesting just a conversation between two cultures and the way they represent and advertise. So a really interesting story on that one as well. In another video I recorded about Jiro Taniguchi's work on the Venice piece, I was talking about how much I love seeing Japanese artists work in color, and I mentioned Daisuke Igarashi. What a beautiful watercolor artist he is. Also, I've seen some Teo Matsumoto stuff that's equally beautiful with watercolors. They, like Jiro Taniguchi, are artists I would really love to see do full books in color. I think they would kill it. But we do have some Teo Matsumoto in here. Really, really, again, interesting approach. This is exactly the kind of thing you would hope for in a book like this, where you have an artist kind of doing like a soundtrack or something where they can play outside of their normal bounds a little bit. So you get these much more woodblock, Japanese woodblock print looking drawings, illustrations from Teo Matsumoto. This one's really cool. I like that if you frame it off, it looks like the Hokusai waves over Mount Fuji type of thing. Notice here that there's almost like some Jamie Hewlett gorillas type of cartooning to the face. So it's an interesting mix-up of approaches. And then also really enjoy the ink wash parts that are unbounded by line. They're their own shape and color. Well, not color, but they're their own shape with no line. It's just texture. Really enjoy that. This short story is by Joanne Sfar. This is a cartoonist I'm familiar with from collaborations with Louis Trondheim. I think the name's familiar. I think Sfar's been part of some of the Trondheim stuff. Really cool. Again, this one is very much diaristic about going and meeting a friend who lived in Japan, and he's going through this friend Waterloo, is a French man living in Japan, and he's basically going through just like trashing on Japanese culture as someone who's seen it from who's lived there for a long time but's not part of it. So like in this one, he's ragging on Japanese people who fantasize about being black. Look at those two dicks making believe they're hip hoppers. And he's very like blunt and politically incorrect about it, but it's interesting because he's giving a peek at how some of those things that are concerns for the American audience or the European audience just really aren't a concern in Japan. And then it's like the author can speak through the mouth of someone who can say whatever they want and not really get in trouble for it. So it's an interesting little read in terms of like how cultures are perceived from different points of view, which again is what the whole book is about. It's a Japanese artist named Littlefish. I find this artist very interesting because I don't see any of the Japanese influence in the art at all. But this like strange story with this guy that grows a flower out of his belly button. I would really like to see more work by Littlefish as well, especially just because it looks like Littlefish has bucked so many of the stylistic trends that, you know, like Buzza Wuzza, you're always kind of talking about how manga looks all the same. And I agree, for the most part, there is a kind of approach that they take. And it's really nice to see someone working almost entirely outside of that approach, other than that they're working just in black and white. Japanese artist I'm totally unfamiliar with, but really enjoying the look of. This is by Moyoko Ano. This really beautiful, quiet little piece here. Seems very much just focused on mood and like hearing the grasshoppers sing, but gorgeous compositions all throughout. Whoever curated this book's got fantastic taste in artists. This piece is by Frederic Bollet, who I've done a review of his book. I forget what it's called, but it's also about a European living in Japan. Pretty much looks like this, except on that book, Jiro Taniguchi is providing the tones. This one has digital tones. These look like photographs that have been altered in Photoshop and like pixelated, rasterized a little bit to get this effect, and then drawn over top of. That's pretty much the Bollet style. So I prefer more with Taniguchi going in and handling the tone work because it makes it a little more hand rendered. But I do think compositionally this is really great, and the story in this one is also really great as well. And a lot of these interesting things where there's like these icons and stuff. So someone who's really using that photo-based technique to do some really interesting design and storytelling in comics. This piece is by Fabrice Neaud, N-E-A-U-D, Node. I'm not sure how to say it. It's talking about the gay culture. So Fabrice is, what I picked up from the story is a gay man, and he's looking for where is the gay area in Japan, and kind of talking about like how they just don't talk about the gay culture, and he knew it had to be there, but he can't find it, or maybe it just doesn't look like what it looks like in Europe, what he's used to. There's a lot of interesting things going on there. But he's also talking about this idea of like how kind of safe it seems in Japan, and like hospitable, things like that. It seems like everyone's really polite. And he had this interesting theory here where he's saying that it could come down to something as simple as everyone always leaves their shoes on the doorstep. And he says it's quite difficult to slam someone's door and stomp off in your socks. Those are the kind of cross-cultural observations that I find really, really interesting. And that may be something that actually does impact their social behavior, but they don't even think about it anymore because it's just tradition to, you know, leave your shoes at the door. But someone from the outside who's not used to doing that could see, you know, the potential impact that has on a whole culture. And that's interesting because, you know, if we want to veer towards a more like pleasant collegial culture ourselves, we could look at a culture that, I mean, obviously there's lots of other things going on there leading to that. But thinking about such small things is like, hey, if we all just start leaving our shoes at the door, like that's going to slow people down a little bit. You can't escape as quick that way. So I thought that was really interesting. And then also just some stunning images in this. Really, obviously, a photorealist working entirely from photo reference, but going so, you know, above and beyond with the details in here. And then not only is this a super cool shot, just in terms of the the 4-point curvilinear perspective going on in this. Maybe 5, yeah, I guess it is 5-point. But the curved perspective going on in this, all the details, everything perfectly rendered. But also this is like this is what he could see from where he was at, I believe, the room that he was staying in, and was able to say all of the, like, figure out loosely all of the other places that were visited during the journey. So really interesting kind of map as well, use of comics to display where things are located. I feel like Brandon Graham would love this kind of panel right here, so I gotta send him a shot of that. Then we get a whole story by Daisuke Igarashi, which is very, very awesome. Anytime I get some more Igarashi, I'm a huge, huge fan now after reading Witches and then Children of the Sea, which I still need to do a review of. But again, reminds me of that same loose, sketchy style that Nicholas de Cressy used in his work. So it's cool to see that too, like artists that did come up in these different traditions, but the approaches can be the same to image making, even if the structure underneath the images, like, you know, has bigger eyes or something like that. But a really cool kind of ghost story that's pretty in line with Daisuke Igarashi's interest in animals and wildlife and nature and all of that. Very beautiful kind of Miyazaki ghost spirits entering the world, girl on a horse. Then we have Kazuichi Hanawa in this story. Again, really cool to see a Japanese artist getting to use the washes and things. I know if a Japanese artist gets like those little couple colored pages, they will do colored work, but nice to see someone working with the washes here. This is an interesting story about a guy going around and applying a tube of stuff to these trees to help the woodpeckers in the area. But some really cool images here. And then a strange one where it's just like a photo inset there for some reason. So real diversity of styles throughout. There's also a story by Etienne Davidu. This is my best attempt at pronouncing his name. I have read one book by Davidu before. Really, really enjoyed it. I forget what it was called. I checked it out from a library, I believe. It was about wine. He was learning how to make wine and working on a farm, helping learn how to till the soil and all that stuff. An artist that I really, really like and a writer that I really, really like, but I just haven't seen any other stuff from him in translation. I would really love more translations of Etienne Davidou's stuff because this and the one other story I've read were both really, really well done, like down to earth type of stories. Also really fun to see like this comic within a comic, but they were talking about he explained how he felt about the food, which is totally alien to his taste buds, and that this is him drawing like how the food felt because it's not something he could describe. There's also a really interesting bit here. I just thought it was really cool. The plain with wheat fields, which endured up to 200 earthquakes a day at the beginning of 1944. And then on June 3rd, the first eruption, which in a year and a half raised Showa Shinza to more than 400 meters. So this mountain like really just kind of blew up out of nowhere. And I thought that was a really interesting story. And I can't imagine being somewhere that endured 200 earthquakes a day near the beginning of 1944. So to think that that kind of geological transformation is happening still, like within, you know, living memory, pretty much is intense. We don't tend to think about those kind of events, but I've never heard that story before. So that I thought that was really cool, and I feel like that's what Etienne Davidu does really well in anything I've seen is these facts about the world that I wouldn't be privy to otherwise, you know, all these interesting stuff about wine. And I wouldn't normally seek out facts about winemaking either, but this artist is capable of writing in such a way that you get sucked into wanting to know more because his curiosity and sense of wonder about the world and whatever he's getting interested in is there. So like I said, I would like to see more, to see if that's like standard operating procedure or see that sensibility applied to fiction. I don't know, but I'd love to see more from Etienne Davidu as well. So a ton of master artists in this book, as you can see, ton of names I love. Cannot recommend this book more. Really cool project, really fun idea. Whoever curated it's amazing taste, and then fanfare as always does. Awesome reproduction. So definitely, if you can, get yourself a copy of Japan as viewed by 17 creators. Salaniyalo, Path of the Shades by Clarence Doss is a really cool ongoing project that Living the Line will be producing. Clarence is a PhD student from Fiji who's studying the myths of Fiji for his doctoral thesis. And part of that study project is that he's producing these comics. They're kind of like Hellboy, where there's these little short stories that capture all of these different mythologies. But then he's using that to wrap the project into his doctoral thesis and then provide educational material where people can come to these comics. You know, they don't have to read his PhD thesis. They can come to the comics and get a more consumable version of the mythology of Fiji.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.